Today's topic is a bit as mysterious as life itself, which happens to be the topic of discussion. Life, its unknown mysteries. Now, what is human life? It's a big question. The mysteries of life constitute the central topic in philosophy, mysticism, in theology, and from the period of Renaissance onwards, of life itself, painting, art, music, and so on. Now, on the one hand, we can think of life as something predictable, something that we can plan. Unless we know and we are sure, we are certain about certain things, we won't be able to make a plan in our life. We won't be able to make preparations for some future events unless we are sure as to what is going to happen. But then it also is a fact that whatever we plan doesn't happen exactly as we plan. Our plans do not always reach fulfillment. If human beings can plan and predict and prepare life in its totality, if man or a woman could completely master the infinite complexities and diversities of life situations, then we won't turn to religion, to God, to mysticism or music or literature or philosophy or poetry. Man will not be any different from animals. Just think of it. An animal follows its natural instinct. Very few animals can plan more than just a few things based on their previous experiences, which are again based on their natural instincts. An animal can never stand out of this flow of evolution and ask the question, what's the meaning of life? Where am I leading? What got me here? And what I'm heading for? An animal can never ask this question. Only an intelligent, a conscious human being can ask this question. And he's forced to ask this question because there are certain unknown mysteries in life. Whatever we plan, even the most perfect organizer, a person who can produce a perfect machine which will function according to his plans, cannot plan his own life. This is something very interesting. We can be sure as to how the machine that we produce is going to function. An engineer or mechanic knows very well how his machine, the gadget, is going to function. But he can never be sure about how his own mind or her own mind is going to function next moment. In fact, that is the mystery of human life. So there is an unknown factor. Third factor we call it, a factor which is different from cause and effect. Because everything in this world which is predictable, which is within the realm of plan, schemes and preparations and predetermination, falls within the realm of cause and effect. We judge, we plan on the basis of this cause-effect relationship. But there's an unknown factor. the cause doesn't always produce the expected result in life, but not in material world. In material world, it's true. The cause, identical causes will produce identical results under identical conditions. The identical cause is maybe the material or the efficient cause. The effect, of course, is the byproduct. And the identical conditions may be secondary causes. But if the causes are identical, the result of the effect has to be identical. But that is not true in human life. And what we normally understand by our life is only the tip of the iceberg. That is the view of Vedanta. As I said earlier, if we could completely plan our life, if we could completely scheme our life, if we can prepare for everything that is going to happen tomorrow, if we are sure as to how we are going to live tomorrow, you won't care for a God. We won't think of philosophy or mysticism. A poet will not write a poem. A philosopher will not worry about existence, metaphysics, logic, or anything. And the mystic won't go and meditate and think of things which are not visible in front of his eyes. So this unknown factor, this is called a third factor, is the motive power behind all human efforts to go beyond, to think beyond, to look beyond the empirical, to think beyond the present, to look beyond what is visible, to be more philosophical, to look beyond the world of the senses. The world of senses will give you freedom from poverty, from material difficulties, but it cannot give you freedom from yourself. Sometimes we become our own bondage. Now, I shall just give a peep into the Vedantic concept of what we are. What is the true dimension of human personality? Now, Vedantic philosophy takes a very comprehensive view of what human personality is all about. At the grossest level, at the empirical level, at the sensory level, we are what we see in front of us. This psychophysical mechanism, which functions according to the vagaries of the senses and mind, which takes things from external world, which react to the stimuli coming from external world. Now, this is only the grossest dimension, what Vedanta calls the Sthula Sharira, which is more or less related to genetics, genealogical tree, what we get from the maternal and paternal traditions, maybe running to several generations backward. So this is all about the what we call the gross body, the psychophysical mechanism, the Sthula Sharira dimension of the human personality. Modern psychology tries to go beyond this, but very often it knocks at the wrong doors. Modern psychology is not willing to accept and change the track. So it follows the same track, practically going around the problem instead of solving the problem. But Vedanta asks the question, is there something beyond the visible, beyond the present, beyond the sensory, beyond the Sthula Sharira, beyond the gross body, the psychophysical mechanism? And Vedanta says there is something beyond all this. Each of us sometimes faces this problem. We want to do certain things. We make all preparations. We get physically and mentally, psychologically ready. We have all the equipments. But at the time of doing that, we are not able to do what we have been planning to do. You see, there is a funny character in an ancient Sanskrit drama, a person who was a perpetual liar. So one day he decided he is going to tell a truth. And he read a number of holy scriptures, made himself ready, steeled his heart, so to speak a truth. When he was about to speak the truth, it happened to be a lie. And there is another example, a person who wanted to tell a lie could not help telling the truth, because what he said happened to be the truth. In other words, there is something within us which comes not from this life, which comes from some unknown source. So modern parapsychologists have made their own attempt to analyze this phenomenon on the basis of law of karma and law of rebirth, which are more or less interrelated. What about those tendencies which we cannot fully explain, which a scientist or a psychologist or a behavioral psychologist cannot fully explain in terms of acquired or genetically inherited characteristics? What about those characteristics? See, in a family where there are 10 children who go to the same school, who are brought up in identical family surroundings, take the same kind of food, they're children of the same parents, but they belong to 10 different characteristics. So there is something in all of them which cannot be explained in terms of genetics or in terms of inheritance or in terms of acquired characteristics. So Vedanta calls it Anusudha Swabhava. Anusarati means flowing. Anusarati actually means constant flow. You think of not the flow of water, but flow of oil. That is the example taken. If you pour oil from one vessel to another vessel, there will be such a thick flow, so there will be no space between one drop and another drop. But if you pour water, perhaps there can be some gap. Now, there is something which comes not from this life, from previous life, which are the acquired characteristics. People walking in the streets of a city may be walking in front of places where meditation is going on, worship is going on, spiritual discussions are going on. And next block there could be a film, a thriller, that either Star Wars or all these big thriller films are going on. And maybe after some time there may be some other places which are not very desirable places for civilized people to go to. Now, when we look at the billboards, some people feel like entering the place where meditation is in progress. Some people, it's all waste of time. After all, these things don't make much sense. They walk ahead and they may enter a film house where a big thriller film is in progress, movie is in progress. And so on. There is so much of diversity, so much of complexity in human temperaments. The 10 children I mentioned earlier, belonging to the same parentage, brought up in the same family, having received the same education, may go to 10 different places for relaxation. In other words, for joy, for enjoyment. Everyone is looking for joy and enjoyment. Enjoyment and joy is nothing but peace. What is that peace? Peace and attempt to run away from ourselves. People want to run away from themselves. There is something within you which forces you to go somewhere else. Some people take refuge in higher life, maybe art gallery, in devotional music, in mysticism, in philosophy. Maybe they go to libraries and so on. And some people knock at some other doors, which may give us momentary escape from the torments of everyday life realities. But when they return to the mainstream life, they feel the tension and the pressure all the more. So here it means what we call our present personality is only a tip of the iceberg. Only 10 feet of the iceberg is seen above the water level. The rest of the huge iceberg is hidden within the water level. This hidden part of the iceberg belongs to the past, which we call previous life. Now, can we make a change in our destiny? The conflict between free will and destiny. The conflict between the idea that we can do whatever we can and its opposite, that we are all tiny boats tossed about in the mighty ocean of destiny, or the results of our previous karmas. This conflict is very ancient. It has been going on for the last more than 2,000 years. Now, Vedanta says we have freedom to improve our destiny, but before we undertake this goal, we have to accept that the present life is only a tip of the iceberg. We have traveled a long distance, and this life is only a tiny dot in the huge straight line through which we were moving. This straight line is only a very relative interpretation. In fact, Vedanta doesn't accept the view that life is one. Vedanta says life is moving in the form of a cycle, not in the form of a straight line. In fact, that is one line of demarcation between Vedanta and most of the Abrahamic tradition. In Abrahamic religious tradition, life is a single route, a straight line. You get one chance. If you improve your lot, if you take refuge in God, well, you have reached your destination. But if you don't do that, well, you are damned once for all. Vedanta, on the other hand, says, even if you do a little spiritual practice in this life, it could be half an hour meditation, half an hour reading scriptures. You may have read for 100 years, but you have meditated only for 30 minutes. Or you may have had some holy, elevating thoughts in your mind, or a desire to lead a holy life. All these, not necessarily physical actions, even a desire to do something good, something noble, something holy, something elevating, will produce a huge spiritual deposit, because that will register a strong impression in the mind. That impression remains there. That thread you can take up in your previous life. I've quoted this earlier, but this is very relevant, so I am referring to this again. There is an interesting discussion in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna is asking a question about the mystery, the unknown mysteries of human life. Lord Krishna taught him many of the important principles of unselfishness, meditation, devotion, the need to lead a spiritual life, and to sublimate our actions into karma yoga. That means every action should be done as an act of worship of the Lord. Every thought should be an act of meditation. Whole life should be spiritualized. All these ideas were taught. And then Arjuna puts a very simple question. And that's a question which may occur to any of us. He says, no, suppose a spiritual seeker works very hard, tries to lead a new life, and then suddenly, if there is a deviation, it happened. Many of the greatest saints of the world were converts, neo-converts to spirituality. They had a sudden turning point in their life. Many of them had these turning points in their 50s. Some of them started quite early in their life. Shankaracharya became a saint when he was only 7 years old. But there have been many other saints who had a sudden turn of life, sometimes getting a few blows, not physical blows. There is a great poet in Hindi language, he is the most prominent poet, Tulsidas. He was leading a very licentious life. So one day that lady told him, see, what a fool you are. You are giving up you are spending all your time and energy for leading a worldly life. If only you could turn your mind to God with the same intensity with which you are leading a worldly life. He was so intensely worldly. His wife told him, if he could turn to God with the same intensity of heart, you could become a saint. And that really happened. Thus, the bitter words had their effect on the mind of this person, and he became a saint. So some of the great saints had a turning point much later in their life. So look at Saint Francis. He was a soldier. Somebody like a crusader. Now, and he became a great mystic and the great saint, Saint Francis of Assisi. So sometimes this turning point, this revelation of the unknown mystery of life takes place much later in life. Here Arjuna is asking a question, what about those who never get a chance to start a new chapter in their life, to turn a new leaf in their life? Working, struggling, meditating, but still not getting anywhere. Sometimes facing a tremendous deviation, a fall, and then death. Perhaps Arjuna must have been a representative of the Abrahamic faith, because in Abrahamic tradition, if you work hard, sincerely, still if you do not succeed, you are sent to hell. There is no way to come out of it. Otherwise, you can go to heaven. Now Arjuna is asking the question, what will happen to me, to some people who don't succeed, who fall by the wayside, or who lead a very good life but then a terrible fall to the end of their life? Is everything lost? Now Arjuna is using the great warrior, the disciple, in Bhagavad Gita, the great dialogue. Arjuna is comparing the fate of these people to a piece of cloud that is floating in the sky. Now, a piece of cloud floating in the sky may be blown into pieces and may get scattered and may perish. Practically, they may become invisible by the force of wind in a storm. Like that, human life also will be lost once for all. You struggle hard to lead a spiritual life, so you could not devote much time to get a very good job, to accumulate a huge amount of money. No. So that worldly life was lost and spiritual goal was not attained. So, in answer to this, Krishna says, well, you are entirely wrong. He says, anybody in this world, even a humble spiritual seeker in this world, who does the least spiritual practice, will have a future. Even a little bit of spiritual practice will have a positive impact on the spiritual destiny. Because even if you don't succeed in this life, when you are reborn, and you will be reborn, you can continue your journey from where you left in this life. What little spiritual practice you have done in this life will help you to continue your spiritual journey, and that will take you to your destination. How this happens, that also Krishna explains. Tartradam buddhi samyogam, like that there is I won't, because there is not enough time, so I won't quote these verses. Those who are interested can turn to the pages of Bhagavad Gita, 6th chapter, Ayadi Shraddhayopedu. From that verse onwards, for about 10 verses, the discussion continues. Now, Krishna says, what happens, how this man is benefited by what little practice, spiritual practice, he or she has done in this life. In the next life, these impressions will remain intact. When people die, they lose their body, the body perishes, so also the physical organs, the senses of action, all will perish. But the tendencies and impressions acquired through actions involving mind and senses of action and senses of perception will remain intact. Which means, if you have done something wonderful with your eyes, if you have read books, or if you have seen a holy picture, if you have meditated, or if you have heard with your ears spiritual ideas, all these will create a positive spiritual impression in our mind. So that remains as a spiritual deposit. You carry this bag of impressions to the next life. The bag will contain not only positive impressions, good impressions, but also some negative impressions. That's why we often face conflicts in life. We always face conflicts. Many modern psychologists who accept some of these ideas try to explain the problem of schizophrenia and multiple personality problems in the light of diversity and complexity of impressions gathered in previous life. That's how they try to analyze the natural conflict that's going on in our mind towards various types of actions. People have this problem. Even the hardened criminal will feel, well, I should not do that. But he does it because the tendency to do evil is stronger. And there are great men, great people who sometimes feel like doing something undesirable. But that tendency is very weak. And the positive spiritual tendency is so strong that the person won't do that undesirable deed. So inner conflicts are sometimes analyzed in the light of multiple samskaras, what we call impressions and tendencies accumulated in previous life. Because whatever we do at a physical level or intellectual level or mental level will create an impression in the mind. That's an important principle. And that constitutes the second level of personality, as I said, that is Sukshma Sharira, or the subtle body. As I said, the 5 senses of perception and 5 senses of action will perish with this body. But you have seen something or you have heard something using these ears, 2 ears, and this mind. These ears vanish in this life. But impressions created by what you heard with these ears will remain in subtle form. That's why we have, as I said earlier, we have certain inherited, not genetically inherited, but inherited in the sense that they come from previous lives and samskaras. Certain characteristics that we don't know, we can't explain in terms of our experiences in this life, which psychiatrists cannot explain but through hypnotism, because hypnotism cannot be beyond the age of memory formation. Psychiatrists and parapsychology, which is called regression, trying to take the person backward to his previous life. But that is not accepted by modern mainstream psychology. But Vedanta, without being superstitious, without being unscientific or irrational, gives a very scientific and rational interpretation and analysis of human personality. And through that interpretation tries to unlock the mysteries of human life. So, whatever we do consciously will need the cooperation of mind and senses of perception or senses of action. And they create an impression, a tendency. That's why whatever we do efficiently, we must have done sometime in the past. Every learning is a kind of revision. If you are a first generation learner, and if you learn very fast, Vedanta will tell you, well, you have learned this sometime, maybe not in this life, in previous life. So that tendency is very strong, which comes as a great help, which comes to help you to learn more efficiently in this life. So that's why Vivekananda made a very interesting statement. You are good because you can't help being good. You are bad because you can't help being bad. The idea is, there are certain invisible, physically unknown, in terms of the present knowledge, unknown mysteries of life, which constitute the essence of subtle personality. Now, Vedanta says, this gives us an infinite hope and promise. We can start a spiritual life anytime, any moment we want. We need not be afraid of being totally lost, because this is not the only chance we have got. It doesn't mean that we should become complacent, lethargic, or we should procrastinate. No, it doesn't mean that. No procrastination, no complacency are advocated. The idea is this. One can always take the promise of Lord Krishna very seriously, where he says the good tendencies and vasanas that you accumulated in previous life helps us to move forward. What really happens is, the formal education that we receive program our mind in such a way that we become blind towards certain facts of life. Because education sometimes kills the normal faculty of man for original thought. That's why some of the greatest creative writers were people who did not have high-level formal education. See Shakespeare, for example. Dostoevsky, for example. Tolstoy, for example. Even Tagore. Many such. This is not a universal principle, but I'm just giving an example. Formal education sometimes programs our mind in such a way that we are rendered incapable of original thoughts, which blocks the progress and the manifestation of some of the innate human personalities. Some of the noble tendencies and impressions that we may have accumulated in previous life, they remain blocked. But these mysteries can be unlocked. They can be brought out by participating in spiritual practices. Not necessarily in intense meditation or prayer, even by reading books which speak of higher life, higher human personalities. Because modern science is sometimes trying to interpret life in terms of naturalism or accidentalism. Naturalism implies, everything is explained as its nature, inherent nature, without any relation to a past cause. Accidentalism is the view generally held by many of the modern scientists today. Everything happens by accident. This philosophy reduces human beings to automatons, machines, and in some cases even monsters. Because if you don't believe in a higher transcendental moral authority in the form of a creator God, then what are you left with? So people who challenge the claims of organized religions try to explain life as in terms of mere accident. But Vedanta, going beyond the idea of a creator God, a transcendental moral authority, tells us that ultimately the reality is immanent, omnipresent, and transcendental. God is not just a person who creates his world and then sits above the clouds and watching over his creation, supervising their actions, punishing them for not believing in him or rewarding them for believing in him. Vedanta does accept this idea of God, but it also says there is a higher and more spiritual idea of God. Vedanta does not reject any of the monotheistic ideas of God. Vedanta fully accommodates, accepts all these ideas, but points out there is a higher concept of supreme reality. And that reality is conceived as the omnipresent, transcendental reality which is present in all living beings, everywhere. This idea was discussed in elaborate detail in one of the most ancient Vedantic texts, which is a part of the Yajurveda tradition in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. There is a discussion between Yajnavalkya and a great philosopher saint, Gargi. I shall just read a few portions to drive home this idea. Very, very profound. In fact, according to many of the Oriental and Occidental philosophers like Paul Deussen, Winternitz, Keith, MacDonald, and also some of the Schopenhauer and others, and also many of the great Indian philosophers. This part of the Vedantic scripture, Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, is supposed to be the most astounding, the most profound interpretation of the reality of human life. So it begins like this. The teacher, Yajnavalkya, says, look here, this reality, this supreme reality, it dwells on earth. But it doesn't exist like trees and mountains existing on earth. It dwells within the earth. Within the earth you have got iron ore, gold, so many different minerals. Its existence is not known by earth. Earth is only a body, a vehicle for it to express. And remaining within earth, it controls the earth. It regulates the function of earth. Not only earth, 28 items are listed out. Air, water, mountain, sky, human energy, the vital parts. All that you can conceive of to drive home the point that this immanent reality is the omnipresent reality. This is a verse. Ye prithviyam tishthan, prithviyaha antaraha, yem prithvi naveda, yese prithvi shariram, ye prithviyam antaro yamayadi, eshate atma antaryami amritaha. Now, the philosopher says, look here, addressing the disciple, Yajnavalkya says, this immanent reality is not one who creates this world and sits above the clouds, away from what he creates, from the creation, supervising his own creation. No. At a higher level, this reality is present, is an indweller in earth, in water, in air, in sun, in moon, in stars, in human vital elements, in mind, intellect. All these are listed out, one after another. The verses are almost identical, except, Prithviyam Dishtan, Apso, Vayu, like that. This reality is present. It is an indweller in whatever that you can think of. But its existence is not always known by these external phenomena. These external phenomena only constitute a vehicle, a means for its expression. In other words, everything in this world is an expression of the divine principle. Everything. So that means the whole creation, the whole humanity is one spiritual entity, one spiritual family, one spiritual fraternity. Not only human beings, the animal kingdom, the whole nature. It is when it says that this reality is present in the whole nature, it is not pantheism which equates God with nature. No, it is not pantheism. What it says is the absolute reality, God doesn't exclude anything in the world. That supreme divine principle is present everywhere. And everything in this world is a vehicle, it means for its expression. Its body, its vehicle. And remaining within all this, it controls, regulates, it makes it function. So, there is nothing that can move without its presence. Sri Ramakrishna, in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, there is a very simple statement. The whole Upanishadic idea is put forward. Not a blade of grass moves without his will. It's capital. Of course, Sri Ramakrishna said nothing can move in this world without God's will. At the higher philosophical level, the Upanishad says, everything in this world is an expression of this immanent reality. And to drive home the idea that this immanent reality is also the omnipresent, the all-pervading, the transcendental reality. All these different items are listed out. And then, at the end of the verse, Yajnavalkya says, Eshate Atma Andaryami Amritaha. That's the last verse. In all these 28 verses you find, Eshate Atma Antaryami Amrita. The meaning is this. After making the statement that this Atman, this consciousness is present everywhere as the indweller in all beings, it is omnipresent and transcendental, then says, look here, this reality is your Atman. Your own inner essence is the same reality. So nothing is excluded. So what is our real personality? Our real personality is this immanent, all-pervading, transcendental personality. Now this is not a mystery. This is not an unknown mystery. Till you reach the spiritual level, the mysteries appear to be unknown. When we reach the spiritual level, it is no more a mystery and no more unknown. Because the same Upanishad somewhere says, everything else is paroksha, means remote, or pratyaksha, directly perceptible. I shall explain this. See, whatever you see around you, see this hall, these chairs, this public address system, these are all directly perceptible. I can see this with my eyes and mind. When my mind and eyes come together, I perceive an object in front of me with my eyes. When my mind and ears come together, I perceive the existence of an object through hearing with my ears, and so on. When my mind and my tongue come together, I know something through taste, like that. So these are all directly perceptible. Now, what about some unknown animal existing in sub-Saharan desert in Africa where we have never gone? An animal that we have, or a plant that we have never seen either in a botanical museum or in a zoo, but we read about it in the encyclopedia. It is something remote. So this public address system, this chair in front of me is directly perceptible. It's called Pratyaksha Pramana. And something totally unknown to me, to my intellect, is remote. It is paroksha, means it is remote. Atman is neither directly perceptible nor remote. Atman is our own inner essence, our true nature. If everything else is foreign to us, this body, this mind, all these are foreign bodies. The only thing which is not foreign to us, the only thing which is not a stranger to our personality is Atman. That's why Yajnavalkya says in another context in Brihadaranyaka, Yash Sakshat Aparokshat Brahma. That's a Sanskrit text I shall explain. Yajnavalkya says, this Atman, this consciousness, which is our inner essence, is not remote. Why? Because it is the nearest and dearest. It is our true essence, so it is not remote. But it is not directly perceptible. The way we see a vehicle, the mountain, it's not directly perceptible. So it is neither directly perceptible nor remote. It is our real essence. It's our true nature. Everything else is foreign to our true nature. Atman is the only thing which is our true real nature, which is it is nearest because it is our own inner essence. That's why at a spiritual level, life is no more a mystery and it is no more unknown. So the title, Life with Unknown Mysteries, is only an approach towards the conclusion that life is really not unknown and it is really not mysterious the moment we realize that we are the Atman, the Supreme Consciousness. So thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. That's it. Sri Ramakrishna Order.